Hello
All
and
right.
welcome to this breakout session, Shaping an Accessible
Hold on. We
Teleworld.
need the interpreters on the screen, Christian here. We need the
I will
interpreters.
wait. I will wait for the interpreter. Ready? I'll start again. Hello and welcome to this breakout session, Shaping an Accessible Teleworld, TeleConferencing. My name is Tina Childress and I will be your moderator today. I am a brown-skinned woman with black and white shoulder-length hair, wearing colorful half-rim glasses and a black cardigan with white top, smiling at the camera and against a black background with the TDI Biennial Conference logo in the corner. It says TDI 24th Biennial Conference in blue text, Reset and Reconnect in light yellow text, and hashtag TDI CONF21 in white text. I feel so privileged to be one of the newer members at large at TDI and have learned so much being a part of this organization. I am an audiologist by trade and also a late deafened adult who uses bilateral cochlear implants. Using technology for accessibility is my jam, and I enjoy learning, teaching, and creating resources about it. I'm choosing to speak for this panel since I'm going to be navigating different windows on my computer, but I'm also fluent in ASL. I am so honored to welcome our esteemed panelists, Roberta Cabrera, Sam Sepah, and Christian Vogler. I will be calling on them individually to introduce themselves and give a visual description. Throughout this panel, I will call on them when they raise their hands to answer questions, and they will pause before speaking or signing so that people are aware where to look. So without further ado, let's start with Roberto Cabrera. Roberto, you're on.
Hello, everyone. This is Roberto. I am so thrilled to be with all of you today. I know the interpreter and so on. That makes me even happier. So I'll describe myself first. I'm a light brown skinned Dominican man. I am sitting here with a black background. I have a polo black shirt as well. Let's see. And yes, I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Roberto. Next, we have Sam Sepah. Sam.
Hello there. I am Sam Sepah, and I work at Google as an access research lead. I have black hair. I wear glasses, and I'm wearing a Google shirt, Google accessibility shirt. You can see the logo of Google. And I have a light background with a painting of a map in the back and a desk with a lamp in the background as well. And I am honored to be invited here and to share during this exciting time where our technology is changing and learning about each other. So thank you for having me here today.
Sam, I want to know where to buy that shirt because I want to buy one.
Well, since I work there, I get free stuff. It's one of my perks.
That's awesome. All right. And last but not least, Christian Vogler.
Hello, everyone. Before I introduce myself, I just wanted to warn you that someone posted a comment saying the male interpreter's voice is pretty soft. So if you wouldn't mind making sure you speak up a little bit or change your microphone. Yeah, I'm saying it's better now. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So I'm a white male with light brown hair with some white in there that are starting to pop up. I have a dark blue button-up shirt on and a dark blue background behind me as well. I handle the technology accessibility program at Gallaudet University in the research group focusing on communication technology for deaf and hard of hearing. And I'm very, very familiar with the topics in video conferencing, and thank you for inviting me here today.
So the goals of this session include providing consumers with a framework to propose accessibility standards and rules across all teleconferencing services, as well as understanding current technology and policy limitations. This topic can go in many directions, so please start thinking about questions that you might have. Please ask them in the Q&A box, but I'll also be monitoring the chat box. So let's begin. So the first question that I have, kind of a warm up before we start taking questions from the audience. Why are remote working and hybrid setups not accessible enough? What is needed to ensure they are fully accessible for all? I'm going to call on Roberta. What is your name sign as what?
Okay, absolutely. Yes, Roberto here. I forgot to add my some information that's really important about me. So my job, what I do for a living, to explain a little bit more about myself. So let me do that as well. I work here in Colorado Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, deaf and blind. And my name sign is here. It's right on your arm. Now, right now, I am using ASL, but know that usually for communication, I use protactile ASL. And so when, depending, on whether I'm home and I'm responding to something virtually or connecting virtually, that changes how I use my communication style. So now to answer your question about hybrid work, in general, the working virtually has opened a lot of doors for many people. Now, and as far as scheduling is concerned, you might be able to participate in events, some at home and some in the office, but it depends on the situation. So at my job, I'm very blessed to have a flexible team, and they prioritize accessibility in everything that I do. And that's really, really key. I'm very grateful to have a supportive team, and they have a policy at their work where the accessibility is very important. They may have telework, right, where you have one day at home, 4 days in the office. So there is that flexibility there. And I know that depends on the area, the state, the region, wherever you work, and how much they're willing to accommodate the employees that work there. And it really does depend on your supervisor, right? The people that you have on your team and the people that are supervising you. If you are serving the public and you want that customer service to be ideal, then also that's incredibly important. Now, if we were just talking about the deaf-blind community, touch is the way in which we communicate. Technology has its faults, right? Anything could disconnect at any time. If you are one-on-one with a person, if you're communicating through touch, that access is going to be there. And unfortunately, over tech, that doesn't happen. So now, if you are relying on the internet, does that it's a hot topic right now that everybody's talking about. Is it really inclusive? Are we talking about inclusion? Are we really talking about inclusion, or what we'd like to be inclusion, right? An ideal.
Sam, thank you.
This is Sam. So mostly working in Google, I would assume that it's similar to other high-tech companies or companies who are involved with accessibility, product design, are pretty similar. Often we ask, accessibility is one of two paths. The first is modifying the space itself, which means it's equivalent for people to have equal access in that space, or if the technology would elevate and you don't have to modify the area, the space. So either the space is being elevated or the technology is elevated. In a perfect world, they'd both be elevated. But that unfortunately is not all circumstances to where they both can be elevated. So very rarely we can see it both being elevated. So whether it be technology or an app being elevated, that space is being changed, whether you're having to sit closer or modify the design so you don't need to be supported by technology. The question is captioning, can that follow you everywhere? Probably not, which means you're going to need the space to provide captioning and not the actual phone or technology. And that often is a question of where is the accessibility needed to be done and where it's made by us or them, holding them accountable. Like a movie theater, that would be them and not us. The mobile person would not be providing that. So it's the discussion of where accessibility is meant to be modified. And I'll leave that up to you to think about.
Christian.
And Christian here, and I agree to Sam's point. And I really wanted to emphasize how important that is for that point of view of this video conferencing and how to provide accessibility. 20% is technology in my point of view, and 80% is concentrated on how people behave. And so really video conferencing is officially, the technology added support for language and hard of hearing. You can enhance that, but communication dynamics on how we communicate back and forth doesn't match hard of hearing people at all. So you have to remind people to take the best practice on how to turn take on who the speaker is, so you can visually go back and forth. And all of that is required to have best practices for deaf and hard of hearing people.
Thank you very much for your comments. And I think that connected, oh, Roberto, did you have another comment?
I did. I wanted to follow up on what Christian said. I liked the comment. I noticed when I look at, let's say, in the work that I do, right? And when the outreach that we do, we have a group, a team there that does outreach and develops content. We decide between the group of us how we're going to communicate, what tips, how is the best way to be accessible. And we kind of design that dynamic, and we do that all online. So now, okay, I'm looking at the link now. I'll share it after. So now, to emphasize that, similar to what Sam said, okay, can technology be that can it be the same in the office as it is at work, at home, right? Can we have that same kind of accessibility, like what we have in the office? And often we end up trying to bring what we see in the office to home. And if you have a deaf-blind person, a hard of hearing person, they may try to make that fit to their computer, whatever setup they have at home, to have it ready so that they can have that same kind of accessibility. But it's time consuming, right? They may have to fill out a specific form so that they can qualify, so that they can get equipment at home. So that can be provided to them. That's one thing, to be as cost effective as possible. They can go through vocational rehab in order to get some kind of services or equipment, what's expected that the government provide for disabled folks. That's one thing that fills the gap in some way, right? For people who might have a cost barrier.
Okay, this is Tina. I'm gonna go ahead and go to the Q&A because there are a couple of questions that I think relate to what we are just talking about right now. So the first question says, some of us deaf disabled consumers are not able to use smartphones because of size. What can we do? And so wondering if any of you have any solutions or comments about that. Go ahead, Sam.
Sam here. Okay, so I've listened to different complaints and feedback, ideas presented for a while now, working in a high tech industry for the last 15 years. I've had a lot of that thrown on me, and that's okay. That's all right. So, one thing I have noticed is that oftentimes people like you saying that the captions are too small or anything like that that's not accessible, impacting the user's experience on a mobile device or a laptop or whatever device you're choosing to use. Oftentimes we'll go up to the product manager or the engineer lead and inform that we have this group of people who are unsatisfied with that, and 99% of the time they're surprised. They've never heard any comments or feedback uh, through the community or through bug reports that it doesn't work, so they don't receive that information. There's no public channel that you can go through. You could go through an app or something to let them know that this design doesn't work well for us. So going back, some people like me are who are privileged enough to direct you into the right way of where you can submit this information. And you can do this not only with Google, but with any other company that you've noticed or have a suggestion for improvements to make through a bug ticket, or to report a call to customer support, or post on a forum. Please do let them know that the public is tracking this, and that if the number of this uh, increases, there's more chances that it will be improved on. So please, as a group, make it a point to be able to communicate loudly and let them know through the public process. And that's my recommendation.
Thank you for those comments. Christian, did you want to answer that question next?
Christian here. I just wanted to add something, and that's a great example. It's extremely valuable to, practice including that in the design to be inclusive designs, which means being inclusive in all kinds of diversities into the design in the product from the beginning, so that you can include everyone from the beginning, and the engineers won't have as many surprises then.
Back to Sam.
Sam here. Yes, I'd like to respond to Chris. We agree. We engineers, not just myself, I work with a lot of small companies and big companies alike, like with IBM, I've worked with, for example. We include that in the design, and our goal is to always and forever be to be inclusive. And oftentimes we have to prove the value, which is why if the deaf community petitions, and has over 2,000 people asking to fix something, the engineers will fix it. And then the next project, they'll keep that in mind, that there's a large group of people that are passionate about this. If they don't hear anything, they're going to assume that everything is okay, which means that their commitment to that expectation is lowered. So we need to keep the engineers accountable that, if something isn't perfect, we have to remind them of that, so that they can include that in the next and future designs for tech companies as a whole.
Back to Roberta.
Just briefly, I want to add, thank you for those two comments. I think that I agree with them 100%. Inclusive design, we have to think again when they're in the process of designing, it goes two ways. So if you think about um, maybe that's not particularly accessible for one group of people. I'll give you an example. I'll mention an example. So like a survey on a website, you might have a survey that is not accessible or one that is, right? One that is and one that isn't. So do you use the accessible one, or do you assume the expectation should be setting up from the beginning that you start with accessibility, but the assumptions harm those decisions that are made. It's got to work in both ways. So if we are going to try to get feedback from people and it is not accessible to begin with, then how can they give us that feedback, right? So it's layered. It's important to keep that always in mind in our data.
Thank you. I know that we talk a lot about people that are signers. Obviously, we're talking also about the deafblind community. I saw a comment from Michelle Michaels. One of the barriers people who like to lip read are experiencing on live and or video conferences and webinars is the inability to lip read the person speaking because that person is not always on camera, whether it be an ASL interpreter voicing or a recorded video with a PowerPoint and a disembodied voice. I think we see that people are making assumptions and not really thinking, about all of the different groups that might be viewing that video. So, like when I talk to consumers, I talk about having an elevator speech, like saying, what do I need as a late deafened person who can hear some, but who can also use an ASL interpreter? I have to voice what works for me so that, I know that it's sometimes hard for everybody to think about all of the possible solutions, right? Because there's so many different groups. But if you know that you're going to participate in something and you know that you need a specific accommodation, kind of talking about what you've all been talking about with providing feedback. I think that's really, really crucial. Do you have any comments on that? Like, for example, with Roberto, I haven't worked with very many deaf-blind consumers before. So I, contacted him offline to say, hey, what do you need so that when you and I have a conversation, that will make it most accessible, right? And so, some of it is they don't know what they don't know. The people that are putting on these different events and creating these things online. And so I think, part of the burden is that sometimes we have to educate others. So, Christian.
Hi, Christian here. Yeah, I agree with you as well. I want to add that to the area where we become very, very frustrated with technology. To be honest, I feel that deaf and hard of hearing people and blind people need to have full control over how you can rearrange the screen. For example, if you're on a video call and enlarging the interpreter and moving them around, and maybe you need captions and enlarging that around too. Looking at the slides, you need to have that moved around and enlarged. Or maybe if you have a bunch of cameras of videos on the screen and it's distracting, and you can eliminate the ones that you don't need so you can focus on the ones you do need. So all of those platforms and technology isn't fully inclusive and supportive yet. Some platforms have made a step in being more supportive, but oftentimes what happens, it becomes just so overwhelming and technology becomes more and more complicated, and people spend so much time figuring out how to use that technology and setting it up and everything, and it's hard to follow along in the meetings anymore. And it's still a big gap in the balance between customization and making it easy to use. And that problem still has yet to be resolved.
This is Tina speaking, and kind of talking to that, I'm looking at Ken's comment that captions and the CC should always be visible to the user and all video conferencing platforms as part of the product design. And just to summarize also, the fact that on many platforms that we don't have that control, that's something that is an issue. But I agree with Christian. I've been working with him kind of informally and sometimes formally on, providing resources to help the consumers understand technology. So it's not just, hearing people and, the general community not knowing what they don't know, but we as people with disabilities, sometimes we don't know what we don't know, or we don't know what are the options that are available. And so that's, knowledge is power, and that's something that we definitely need to address. Um, all right, I'm looking through the question and answer right now because I thought it would be better to try to connect some of these questions with what we're talking about before moving on to the next question. And so to Debbie Hagner's point, universal design, when we turn on captions, of course, we know many people other than people that are known to be deaf or hard of hearing can benefit from captions. They don't know they have hearing loss, or they realize that, they want to turn off the sound on their video that they're watching. If they're second language learners, many people benefit from that, kind of like how texting and email, has helped many people as well. So Gideon has a question directed to Sam. It says, have you ever seen or received an ASL message among those suggestions for improving a product or application? How available is the opportunity to submit a video report? It can be difficult for a deaf person to explain what they see or experience in English.
Sam here. I'd like to answer that. For Gideon, that's a great question, and it's not a new topic we've discussed. So, long story short, first of all, there's not enough people to send feedback from deaf and hard of hearing or deaf and blind in that community. There's not enough people sending that in, so we don't ever receive those cases. And therefore, there's nothing. And if it does happen, and we do find it, it just hasn't been found or identified or even attempted. And then secondly, I can understand why there's no barrier to access. If I'm on video, if I'm signing, oftentimes if you want to express yourself in signing in a video, then take that opportunity to film yourself and upload that, like on Google Drive. You can send it on there and say, hey, I'm using sign language. Please view the video and the link and have an attachment file. Maybe a survey won't include that. Please include that attachment into the link, and then you can do your part and, meeting us halfway. And I'll type out something, and if I can't, then I'll sign it. I'm willing to do that and give you feedback to have you watch. And that's where the partnership process comes into play. And the deaf community hasn't sent us any links to their videos or anything. So back to my point, we do need to figure out how to make some noise and send some feedback and voice our ideas. So we can do anything. We can be creative, maybe have someone help you with typing it out and then attach a video to go along with it. And then secondly, I also want to go back to talking about captioning. It's interesting, in YouTube, our captioning team have noticed that most people who click and use the CC feature in YouTube's platform are not actually deaf and hard of hearing people. Most of them are just normal people out in the world. Often people will click it and then, or deaf people think that it's for my community. And it's like, no, we've looked at the statistics and everyone in the world uses it. So to reference what Tina was saying, maybe a mother and a baby, are trying to watch a video and the baby's crying and it's too loud. So she'll be watching the video with closed captioning. So there's a lot of reasons for everyone to use captioning. It's actually a revolutionary, empowering tool right now that's not only making it accessible, but universally used for a design. And so I just wanted to throw those 2 points out there.
Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next question I have on my list. And this is somewhat related to Eileen's question in the Q&A box. So the question is, who should be responsible for ensuring that video conferencing is accessible? Is it the video conference platforms, the users, or some combination of both? And so Eileen's comment about leaving captions on all the time for all things, I think can be a little bit sticky, and I don't know if there's one right or wrong answer to that. But do you have any opinions on any of that? Christian.
Yes, Christian here. Yes. So first, I want to start off by explaining that there is a law applicable to video conferencing at that level. It's the 21st the video conference CVA, CCVA, and they're called the Elevated Communication Service, Advanced Communication Service. So ACS is the abbreviation for that. And the FCC has the authority to establish control over that piece. And unfortunately, there is some ambiguity in the law, specifically saying accommodations and operations for video conferencing. And what that means for video conferencing at that level is that there's issues with the operations and how it runs. It's inseparable. Okay. So that should have never been absolved. And we have to work together to publish an article at the University of Colorado for Law and Review to focus on that topic. And I'll send a link in the chat box soon so that we can all take a look at that. But the bottom line here is it's very complicated. And that we need to put some responsibility on the video platform people and have some continuity on what it looks like and clear things up. And then also to establish where that boundary line is with the platform and technology and the person who is setting up the conference, who is hosting the conference. There's a blurred line there too.
So, Roberta.
Roberto here. So to piggyback on what Christian is saying, often we forget what is the purpose of that video conference happening. So what is the goal? Who is the audience, right? Do we think about who's in the audience? What is the goal? Is it to target the deafblind community or to invite the deafblind community? Right? Is that the goal? If the goal would be, if it's a specifically larger audience, then that's who needs to be accommodated. So we have to think about that. Who is in the audience? What is the intention of that particular workshop, that video conferencing? What is it being used for? And then thinking about the host often forgets that they can put in some way for the audience to let them know what their needs are, right? They can put an email address or whatever. They can list accommodations, as an option and open themselves up so that the audience will tell them when they need something. So if we can improve that communication between the hosts and that connection to the audience, then I think those things can improve.
So during this pandemic year, I have been involved with several theater groups. That's, I guess, I would call my hobby is theater and attending live events and music and things like that. And what's been awesome to see is in the theater and live events community. I mean, sometimes they are the most desperate for money, but I see them go so way out of their way to make sure that their performances are accessible and inclusive and that they have diversity. And it's been amazing to see that happen. I have not seen that so much always in the business community, right? So as consumers, I think that that's what we need to do. We need to voice that we need that specific accommodation. So exactly what you guys have all been saying. So thank you for those comments. Okay, so the next question is, what are the current accessibility limitations with teleconferencing that you see? Also specifically for the deafblind community. Sure, I will ask the question again, Roberto. So the question is, what are the current accessibility limitations with teleconferencing, including for the deafblind community?
Sure. So there are so many, but I will try and focus on some of the major ones. So now the first question is their interpreting services ready, right? Is that something that's thought of immediately, or do they have they even considered that? So okay, has it just getting an interpreter clarification. So is that deafblind person have access to an interpreter that can communicate with them in person? Right? Somebody who can be a communication facilitator to support them in the process of accessing this teleconferencing video. That's one thing that people could consider as an option, and it's often they're not available, depending on where that person lives. They may not live close to a city where there's a large supply of interpreters that can come and do something like that. Um, but it is best practice. And if that was a policy that they followed, then that would be fantastic that they could provide that as an option. That would be what would be most accessible. Now, when you're setting up that conference and you're getting the word out about it, how much time have you used to prepare for that conference, right? Is it happening next week? Is it happening in a month? Because it's going to take time. We need to share with the community what the topic is about. Many times the audience might want access to the information beforehand. And so if everything is tried to put on, if you try to put things on very quickly, then access is not going to happen. And so the time needs to be taken into consideration. So that part is really frustrating for the deafblind community. And as far as limits are concerned, I mean, what technology is available to them? If you've got a state program that provides equipment, like I was mentioning before, but then there's criteria, right? That deafblind person might not fulfill those criteria, or that person who needs that equipment might not be labeled as somebody who qualifies for that program. And you might be looking only at what a sighted person might be needing, and accommodations for a sighted person, not looking necessarily at a deafblind person. And so those are all things that need to be taken into consideration. They also might be using old technology, right? They might not be using what they may have been. There might be equipment that has been accessible to them, but that isn't what's most needed, in that moment, or it may not be compatible. And so that'll have an impact on whether or not they can participate or not. There might not be enough technology available, right? There might be equipment for a certain amount of people, but not everyone. And another thing that we have to keep in mind is that the identity of being deafblind is a spectrum. Not all deafblind people communicate in the same way and have that same need. And so many of those decisions end up being made by sighted people who don't know these things about the wide spectrum of how the identity is very varied.
Christian or Sam, do you have any comments on that or? Okay, Christian.
Yes, Christian here. Uh, Thank you for all that information regarding deafblind accessibility issues. It's very valuable, and often what happens for deafblind, um, it's important to focus on those things, and it's often pushed aside. But I would like to add some challenges for deaf and hard of hearing people as well, who uh, read lips and people who sign. And from my experience, for example, again, the video relay conferencing, how there's a whole group of people and someone signing and everyone knows sign language, everything goes smoothly, it goes well. But if everyone is hearing with a deaf signer, and in that conference, it's going to be tough, because the hearing people won't know sign language, and there's just not a lot of good options to. And of course, you're going to pull in an interpreter, yes, but if you can't call one and it's unofficially, called last minute, you're not going to have time to call for an interpreter. And in that situation, if you're hard of hearing and you can read lips and you feel comfortable speaking for yourself, you have a great advantage there, because technology is able to support auto captioning to an extent. For a small group of people, I'd say it'd be good for that situation. But if you can't, then you don't have language there. And how are we going to fix that situation? So I just wanted to throw out that challenge to technology and tech industries on how to support better language.
Sam.
Sam here. I have seen not just from Google, but also other startup companies and big corporations have set up some kind of accessibility, not just for deaf and hard of hearing, but different accessibility features and tools that are able to plug in to as an extension. And 90% of them never are promoted or bothered to be modified or improved for the community. 90% of the time they just go away. For example, a while ago, Google had come out with this video called Hangout. It was an old version. Now it's called Meet. It used to be called Hangout. And so I would say this was about 7 or 8 years ago. And the engineers built it with a special feature to where deaf people could see the interpreter on the screen during a meeting, but the hearing person wouldn't see them. And the best part is that the interpreter would overlap on the deaf person. And that was a while ago, and probably 1 or 2 years ago, after it had come out in articles in newspaper and was advertised, people weren't using it enough. And so whenever the company had moved on to a new platform version, Meet took over that feature. It wasn't considered beneficial and they were kicked out. And so there was no data to prove that people were using it enough to support keeping it. And so my input for everyone is that if you want these features, then use it, please. And if you don't use it, at least share and tell people about this cool feature so that maybe others will use it. And if you have any complaints or concerns, but don't use it, and it just becomes, a moot point, because engineers' times are very expensive. They're one of the most expensive people in the world. But I would say we need to use it. And, it's just like if you don't eat your vegetables, you don't get to get your ice cream. It's kind of the analogy I want to make here. Christian, I want to jump in. And Sam, you're right on the nose. I remember Google Hangout. I remember it was really good. For college, it was really beneficial. Super cool. I think for NAD in 2012's conference, Google set up a demonstration on how to use a VRS interpreter for the conference, and they showed the technology and how it worked, but it was never released. So I suspect that with the FCC and their regulations, it had something to do with that. And then we also need to get onto the FCC and how they need to change and improve and elevate their rules as well on how to implement VRS and VRI in today's platforms. FCC is stuck on that phone system, and that's just not enough. VRS needs to change to support video conferencing at that level.
So I'm going to go a little bit off topic to a question that I did not give you guys ahead of time. So put on your thinking hats. So, throughout this pandemic, using things like ASR captioning as well as live captioning, many times deaf and hard of hearing consumers and deafblind consumers have complained about the delay. Does anyone here want to talk about why does a delay happen? Because I think that sometimes consumers don't understand why that happens. And I would just like to clarify it for them because I know some things are not in our control. They're not even in the control of the platform. So is anyone able to answer that question? Why is there a delay in captioning?
Christian here. I guess everyone's looking at me.
So I'm looking at all of you, but I'll start with Roberto. He's more brave than you, Christian. Go ahead, Roberto.
Okay, so I'll keep my comments brief. Often, I've often discussed this topic about ASR, automatic speech recognition, for those that might not know. So ASR, when you think about the different platforms, there are some that are using it better than others, and then there's some that are just pitiful. So you have to identify where it is being used in a way that is actually effective. And again, what is the audience, the goal of the audience, or the audience need? Is it something that's going to be available last minute? Then it has to be ASR. You really have to think if you're going to plan it in advance, then of course you can look at it differently. If you planned it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month before, you get that live captioner, the person who is trained in that and knows exactly what to do, and you get the ASL interpreter. And so, if you have the blessing of time, then you can design how you want it to look. So for me, as a deafblind person, and in the community, really live transcripts and transcription is just beautiful for me because I can follow along with the transcript as well as with the interpreter. I can edit that full transcript on the side. I can edit the color, the background, the font. I can edit the size. I can also change the pace. The pace of it is also way more manageable. A lot of times when I'm looking at the captioning on the bottom of the screen, it's moving so quickly. I miss what's going on. So when I have that option of the transcription, I can take my time and read through it and follow. The pace works much better with me. So I notice that the captioning on the bottom it's stressful. It actually impacts my mental health when I'm trying to access things and I'm trying to catch up with the captioning on the bottom. If I have that full transcript, it really makes a huge difference for me. So I would imagine that it would be the same for other deafblind folks. That's just my little 2 cents.
Go ahead, Christian.
Okay, thank you. Christian here. So more about the technology issues and with captioning and what causes that delay. So suppose, here in the Zoom meeting right now with the four of us, how Tina's speaking and her computer is sending audio up to the cloud in Zoom. And then the captions are being pulled down from that audio. And there's going to be some delay happening there. And then it also depends on the internet connection from the person. And sometimes Zoom will have an audio delay, which matches up with the video better, actually, with the captioning. And then the captionist hears that and has to create the captions and then sends it back to both Zoom and the stream site, the page of where it's at. And I don't know exactly how it works out and it integrates, but I've noticed that having both Zoom and that page open at the same time adds more of a delay. I don't know who's responsible for that at Zoom or at the captioner's webpage, but I think they need to be put together and figure it out and manage that delay to be less of an impact compared with automated speak recognition, ASR, in Zoom. And that's a benefit. You know, I'm sure the audio is being sent to the cloud up there again, and then Zoom's able to operate more efficiently doing that. And I'm sure the lag time is less there. So that means if the captioning is integrated and embedded at the platform level, there'll be less of a delay. But if you involve a third party, then the caption's gonna be more of a delay and have a longer lag time.
Sam.
Yes, Sam here. So Chris, you hit it on the head there. The more people that are involved, the more process there is, no matter how fancy the technology is, the more you add to it, the more of a delay there's going to be. And trying to minimize it, there's always going to be something else that gets in the way. You know, whether it be your personal laptop that's slower, or your phone that's smaller, which consumes more data, there's always some kind of intervention impeding that goal. And so that's why we at Google try to use live transcribe, and it doesn't rely on going up to the cloud and back. We want it to stay localized in that location, and that'll improve the delay of speed. But again, remember, this is still a machine, which means it's going to need time to process. Regardless of how small the delay, it's never going to be at a zero. You know, if it stores each and every sound and matches that word, that's millions of files within your phone, and you don't want a big old phone book sized phone in your pocket. You want a thin, light phone. So you're going to have to keep in mind that the process is has a tolerance level that we can forgive, and it will not replace your experience being, you know, trying to be the best. And unfortunately, you do have to pay a small price for that lag time.
Yeah, and this is Tina. If you've been watching any of the other sessions, there's been a lot of discussion about people choosing ASR over live captioning for the reasons that they do. And it really is, you're going to weigh. You're either going to have a live captioner that is going to be more accurate, but is going to have more of a delay, or you're going to have ASR that is going to be more synchronous, but is prone to more errors. And so that's something I think that there's no solution for that. But thank you for explaining that. It's all about integrating all of these technologies. And when you introduce a human person into this, you know, they have to listen, process, physically type what the captions are. Of course, there's going to be more of a delay versus something like live transcribe, like Sam was talking about. So thank you very much for that. I did want to direct you to the comments from Dana, because I think that's something that we haven't talked about. Maybe this might be our last topic. And so it's talking about acquired hearing loss and acquired cognitive or neurological issues, and talking about having accessibility options be more user friendly. So again, you know, you can be really complicated with more options, or you can have fewer options, but then you might have less flexibility. So do any of you have any comments about that? Christian?
Christian here. I don't want to take over the whole meeting. I don't mean to, but anyways, I agree with Dana's comment. You mentioned, you know, technology and how complex it is. It's amazing. I mean, it's terrible, but it's also amazing. So I think we need to take a closer look. You know, the University of Maryland Center, the Trace Center, they have a project where they're trying to figure out how to create equipment and computers and mobile devices and tablets match what you need, accommodate to what you need to give me exactly what my accessibility will need, instead of us having to change everything in the technology to match what I need. It matches what we need, and it's called Morphic. And it's not ready for production, but they're making good progress, and it's very interesting in that field of research in that area. But I fully agree with you in that philosophy. Trying to figure out how to use and edit everything. No, the computer needs to be compatible with what I need.
Sam.
Yes, Sam here. There's a lot of argument about that regarding where the macros are huge. It's private data. It's the user's right, and with computers adapting to what you need, but you're sacrificing your privacy. And some people are comfortable with that, some people aren't. Which means, let's say if I wanted to adapt to what I need and it sees everything in my house, like right now, like what it knows what color my skin is, it knows what my status, my social economic status, all of those things, and it's going to know all of these questions. And then also your private data, how much do you want them to know about you? If it's a balance of your privacy right and how much you want it to adapt to what you need. Oftentimes people are willing to sacrifice that. In a large society, sometimes they resist that idea, and so that's where I'm going to leave that.
Roberta.
Roberto here. There's so much we can improve on, right? There's a lot. One of the things that would be great, that I've been always looking forward to and hoping for and pushing for is, I keep moving, doing everything I can to push that forward, and that inclusivity, the idea of inclusivity, pushing and challenging as much as possible. Just the concept of inclusivity, really thinking about it from beginning to end, right? Thinking about the whole process and seeing it really. I just, and not putting inclusivity as this last thing that is an add-on after everything else, right? Like really looking at it from the very beginning. That's my dream. That's what I hope for the future. That's what I want to see from beginning to end.
Yeah. And I think, from all of these comments and the comments from the panel, it's about options, right? There is no one solution that can fit everybody's needs. We all have different preferences for accessibility, technology, and what we feel comfortable with. That satisfying everybody with one tool, we know it's not out there. It's just like saying that everybody should wear the same clothes all the time, and we know that that's not possible either. So we have about 1 minute left. Um, do any of you have any closing comments or last thoughts that you absolutely have to share with the audience? Okay. Yes, Roberto.
Technology is our enemy, but can also be our best friend, right? It's both of those things. It's a complex relationship. And so we can, through communication, and inclusivity, and having that frame is the way that we can work together. I think that's super important.
Sam.
Sam here. First of all of your comments that you've put in the chat are amazing. Obviously, in the chat box, all these comments that I've seen you've put in, I can tell y'all are passionate and want to be involved in the process, and that energy and passion needs to keep going. uh, for all the tech centers, not just with Google, but Amazon, Microsoft, and even small companies that, you know, are eager to work with y'all. I know it can be an exhausting process of getting onto them, but remember, you're doing this not just for yourself, but for the betterment of everyone in the next generation too. And then secondly, I've seen some people out there making comments saying, you know, why don't you let me know? So if you learn something new that's coming out or a new announcement, please share that. There's a lot of social media that's really powerful, or, you know, some people might not have accessibility to get timely information. So share that. Sharing information is one of the most powerful and beautiful gifts that y'all have right now, more than ever in human history. When you get that information, share it in our community. Let everyone know, hey, this new captioning tool is coming out, or hey, there's a new feature coming out from this company, or even just like teasers that are coming out soon. Go ahead and share that. You know, that's the most powerful tool, and it's beautiful. That's how we can keep things alive and pursue that equal accessibility. So please continue doing that.
Okay. And Christian, do you want to say one last comment? I don't know if you're raising your hand or not. Okay.
Yes, Christian, here I
Yeah,
am. I was raising my hand. I love technology. You know, I can tell people are passionate, and I know it's very important that we, deaf and hard of hearing people, we're very diverse, and we come from many different points of views.
absolutely. Thank you so much, panelists, for your participation. Thank you to the audience for joining us today and really kind of like stretching us out and making us think about different things. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. Thank you.